Welcome to People of Yes. We are the 8th of August, 2014, interviewing Dr. George Patterson on church planting movements within the Baptist tradition. Dr. Patterson, welcome back to People of Yes.
It's good to be here with you, Galen.
This past week I met a family from the Karen people of Myanmar who have embraced the gospel since over a century ago through Baptist missionaries from North America. I wonder if you could help review for us some of the distinctives of the North American Baptist movement that multiplied churches by the thousands, especially across the American frontier, in view of urging Baptists to return to those principles and practices that made them so highly multiplicative in their early days.
Well, Dr. Curry, the Baptists are kind of well known historically for being rebels. They would rebel against the larger denominations back in their history, and especially against the heavy church hierarchy. When they have multiplied most rapidly, both in the United States and elsewhere around the world, they've done tremendous missionary work around the world, started many church planting movements, but it's precisely where they have quit imitating the larger, older denominations, and where they've continued in a very simplistic form of church. You look back at the American frontier, where Baptist churches just multiplied by the thousand across the frontier. And one thing that's very simple and easily done is the way they prepared new pastors for all these new tiny churches. Many of them simply began in homes. The Methodists, for the most part, did the same thing. A young man wanted to become a pastor. Well, back in those days, only people highly educated in the cities went to a seminary. That was almost unheard of, and especially among Baptists back in those days. So they would go and live with an older Baptist pastor, and they would follow him around, imitate everything he did, absorb, watch as he modeled pastoral skills. And then they would marry his daughter. Then they would lay hands on him, and he became a new pastor, a shepherd. So they avoided the heavy professional clergy, which will invariably stifle the spontaneous multiplication of churches, because it's simply impossible to provide a highly trained, highly professional clergy for house churches when they're multiplying like they do on the cutting edge of a church planting movement. Also, you look at the Baptists, historically, they've always emphasized the priesthood of the believer. The believer, as the Baptists have seen it, are gifted by the Holy Spirit and empowered by Him, anyone to do what the priest or clergy would normally do. So they felt quite free to start home groups and start tiny churches anywhere by anybody at their own expense. This freedom that it gave them. Now, they haven't always articulated it in that way, but they've certainly practiced it.
So if you were advising Baptist pastors or missionaries today on how to become more effective in their own church planting to reach whole populations, what are 3 or 4 recommendations that you would make to them?
Well, I would like to just speak to the pastors or leaders in Baptist churches that are stagnant or declining. All right, belong to a denomination that is declining. All right, that is not acceptable. That is not Christian. It means that something very non-Christian, very non-biblical, perhaps we could even use the word apostate, is going on. Now, I'm not here to throw rocks, and I don't want to put my finger on all these things. I would sound judgmental. But what I would say is this, that the thing that stands out so strongly is that whenever the Baptists have tried to imitate the other older denominations, they've gone to a heavier institutional route. The church planting then is way too expensive to maintain a movement. You simply cannot sustain the church multiplication, daughter churches, granddaughter churches. Also, they talk about the highest standards of academic excellence for training their pastors. All right, when you start talking that way, up go the costs. People have to get college and 3 or 4 years of seminary in order to be a pastor. All right, that's fine for some. In fact, you and I have both gone that route, okay? But cannot make that the norm, or you destroy any hope of having a church planting movement. So whenever Baptists would go back to their roots, back to what God blessed, when their Baptist church is really multiplying rapidly, and let the historians, the Baptist historians, search out what they did and what they did not do. The Baptists have a great legacy of rapid church planting. They must restore that, and it will take them back to New Testament practices.
So it should not be too astounding that many of the consultants to church planting movements around the world to this day happen to be Baptist in their background. They seem to have brought or recovered the very principles that God had blessed so much a century ago. Well, Dr. Patterson, thank you for being with us again today.
Well, thank you for having me, Dr. Currat.
We look forward to seeing you here again soon.
Great.